Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a Monday afternoon edition of the Garn Report, our first playoff recap show with a guest here, Brady Hawk, who you've seen before, who we've talked with before. Great to welcome him back to the show here. 5 Reasons Sports, Brady Hawk 305 on Twitter. Great follow for all things Heat. And we're doing it again, Brady. Third year in a row. These two teams meeting. A bit of a blowout in game one. I think that's fair way to classify it. Some competitive stretches in this game. An interesting game for Jason Tatum, who finished a triple-double as well as just +3. So when he was on the court, this was a close-ish game. But some of the second unit stretches and the depth difference in these teams, given the injuries here, clearly the difference in game one where the Celtics led by as many as 31. Scorching shooting for Boston, not so much for Miami here. And an interesting place to pick up the series and look ahead because on one hand, I think you can look at this and say the Heat are just overwhelmed here. That 17-2 stretch to open, some of the massive runs Boston went on. And then you say, on the other hand, the Heat, given what they have here, competed decently for stretches in this game. So which side do you lean on?
I mean, I kind of land on the side of like they're these are just two completely different offensive teams right now. Like you just look at
Yeah.
the ease that Boston could flow into things, the shooting. Obviously, you look at the way they shot in that game, but obviously the different options that they have. And look, this isn't we compare it to these other two series in past years, but I think the biggest difference from Miami's perspective is that like they don't have a guy they can help off of anymore. They don't. There's not that guy in Boston where you could say, okay, we could pull a little away from him and we could load up on this guy and load up in help side. They can't really do that anymore. Like they just have so much shooting on this team that they kind of have to like play. They have to stay home on so many different guys. And then you look on the other side of things. Miami just doesn't have many offensive options right now that can really flow into things. I think Boston, their switchability in their guard defenders really it can give Miami trouble with the lack of ball handlers and just natural scores that they have on the roster right now. And you just saw that. I mean, they really took Tyler out of things just with the way that they kind of ran around screens and just got him out of his rhythm. So it's like the the difference in the toughness of shots, I think, was the biggest difference in this game. It's like the amount of like good looks that Boston got consistently because of the overreactions and the amount of times Miami has to absolutely work for every single bucket that they could possibly get, whether it's offensive rebounds, trying to get an easy one off a tip in, trying to run the floor and get an easy one in transition. Like those are your options at this point because the half court is just such a difference maker on both sides.
Yeah, let's start with the Heat defense and the Celtics offense, that matchup, because early in the game, of course, Brown goes on that run. Porzingis is hitting shots, Holiday, Tatum. So you end up at 17-2. And then the Heat worked back to 26-21, basically into those second units, putting the ball into Horford's hands. He missed a few shots inside and out, and then Pritchard, Hauser missed a couple shots there. I think those three went 2 for 8 from 3 in the first quarter. So they were going to bet on those guys missing shots, and they did for a quarter. And then to start the second, Hauser hit 3 in a row, and they're off to the races. So a little bit of hedging, it looked like, away from those guys. You can't zone it up quite the way you did in the past if you're
No,
Miami. And they tried it here. It did not go well. And then the Bam thing is going to be interesting to me too. Obviously, they'll need him more often than not straight up against Porzingis. And he's a guy that would roam a little bit in the past, maybe play off of Marcus Smart or Robert Williams.
hmm
And that guy, like you mentioned, isn't here anymore. So I expected the Heat to get creative and mix up looks with how they'd approach Boston here and maybe disrupt them a little bit by showing them a ton of different looks. But the Celtics responded to everything they saw pretty well in this game.
for sure. I'm glad you brought up the zone because that's kind of the biggest difference. I mean, Miami's noted it. We can all see it. That's the biggest difference this year is you just can't go zone against this team as often. Number one, I think if you're Miami and you're looking at in approaching this, you're saying if we're going to go zone, it has to be a non-Porzingis lineups. Like that. That's kind of the way you have to look at it. He's a zone breaker. You can put him in the middle of there. He can stretch the floor, as we know. But I think the issue with Miami's zone in that game, as we've seen, like you're mentioning, the Tatum triple double, some of those Hauser threes, a lot of that was coming from like them just overreacting to Tatum, sending a double it's a swing and it's a Hauser 3, or a swing and it's a Pritchard 3, and then he mixed in a lot of, skip passes, some really good reads over the top. And it's like, I think it's going to hit a certain point where if Miami is in the zone, you can't overreact to single coverages. You kind of have to allow it at certain points, because this isn't the same team anymore. You can't just say, okay, we're going to double this guy, because they're going to have a response. So I think that they're going to have more trust in their zone, in terms of like, okay, whoever's on that bottom box, just live with, Tatum taking a turnaround jumper, and just play the numbers game and say, if we're going to bet on anything, just let's bet on twos over threes at this point, like, instead of allowing these open threes over and over. And then the Bam factor is big. I mean, look, they won their last play-in game. They made the adjustment against Chicago, where they put Bam under Rosen. And they put Nikola Jovic on Vucevic, which is something they've done a lot in the past. They like to kind of put Bam on a wing, and if they have somebody that could size up, that's just what they like to do. I was not of the mind that they were going to do that too often, especially in game one. But in this series, I think they want Bam on Porzingis. I think they want to try to keep that some type of length and physicality on him, to try to get him out of make things as tough as possible. And the recovery speed. I mean, look, they had moments where they had Kevin Love or Nikola Jovic on Porzingis. They're, running pick and pops, and it's, Jovic or Love lagging behind and has a late contested. It's a Porzingis 3. You want to put Bam or somebody as fast as possible to try to make those recoveries. So that's the biggest thing to me. I mean, I don't expect Miami to match Boston's offensive production. Miami's only thing they can do is try to make games like this ugly. They have to try to just muck things up and really give a crazy defensive effort and try to push things into transition. So the only way to do that is now for them to make some adjustments. It's probably going to mean, as you said, less zone and a little more single coverages on some of their wings, and just say, we have to bet on Bam, we have to bet on Haywood Highsmith and a lot of our better defenders, just to play one-on-one and just see where it gets us. So that's kind of what I would expect in game two.
Yeah, that was the only thing I could think of for them going into this series, is switch. It just switch, cut them off at the 3-point line, try to take those threes away. I mean, it felt like the Celtics were going to get 63s off in this one at a certain point. And you're like, wow, that's right where they want to be. And of course, if some of them didn't go down, maybe it's a closer game. They end up hitting 40% of I think 49 they ended up taking. So you're done if you're Miami, if that's going to happen here. 45% in the end, they're just ridiculous. So there's nothing you can do if you're Miami and you're in that position, giving up that kind of 3-point efficiency shooting. But there will be a game where that probably levels off a little bit. I think for the Heat, offensively, they got to hit their threes too. And that's what it's going to come down to here. They hit their threes in that Chicago game. They produced some quality looks throughout that game. And of course, no Butler in that one as well. So I think what you want to see is them match the Celtics shot quality, and they're capable of doing it. It's tougher without Butler. You got the hero Bam pick and roll you can go to, and they try to get in the mid-range. They try to get to the rim, it looked like. And I felt like as this game went on, they got a little more comfortable offensively. The numbers were just abysmal early on, and then they finish off, what was it right here, 47% from the field, 32 from three. Those were much lower earlier in the game. So you got Jovic going a little bit later. DeLon Wright hit 5 threes in the fourth, which was ridiculous, and made it close-ish after 31 late there. I thought Love attacking Hauser early on worked pretty well. And Hawkes, it looked like early on, I don't know what to say other than the lights were a little too bright, but he got more comfortable as the game went on there too. So you saw some guys start to wake up and do some things in this game offensively for the Heat. And like you said, Brady, they're not going to match what the Celtics do offensively in terms of firepower. But if you create quality shots and hit threes, and I think you probably have to try to chase the Celtics 3-point output a little bit, you can at least give yourself a chance to stay close. And then, in a close game, the Celtics have slipped up a few times here. They're just so tough. Even if you get to that position, you want Butler in that circumstance to close it out. And it doesn't feel like you have a closer here, even if you get to a crunch time. So this is why I think a lot of people look at this series and say, this might be a sweep.
No, I've been kind of talking about that in terms of, like, if it is a close game in one of these games and it comes down to it, that is the worry if you're Miami, is the closing time. And not only Jimmy, but Terry Rozier has been their closer in a lot of games in this regular season, where he's kind of the guy that can create.
That loss is so tough too.
It's tough. It's tough because there's two guys that can create looks out of nothing. And now you're kind of forced with a lot of your role players and other guys that are more system players that work off of those guys. And then now you kind of bump everybody up a slot in terms of first option, second option, third option. I think kind of the adjustments for Miami offensively will be like Tyler. You mentioned the Tyler Band pick and roll. It's always been kind of one of their mainstays, but I think Boston's so prepared for it. I mean, it's the number one thing on the scouting report. Everybody knows it's coming. They know what coverage they're going to throw at it. So I think the adjustment for Miami is more Tyler off ball. They're going to try to work different actions off the ball for him, try to get him more, spot ups. Say we need your shooting more than anything right now, so we're going to try to work you in that area. And you mentioned Jaime Hawkins. I think that's kind of the guy they're going to have to put the ball in his hands a ton, as we've seen in this last game, because I mean, Tyler has to find, advantages against the drop. He has to find space in that area, and the way Boston kind of cut it off and switch it off kind of hurts him in that way. Whereas Jaime can find different advantages on switches or something with his back to the basket. Like if you're Miami, you're saying we can go to that at least and try to see if we can get a better look out of those actions. So then it comes back to Bam, who has to, be aggressive as he was in game one. I thought he was, put his head down a few times. And look, Boston didn't get to the line a ton in that game one, obviously. Miami, if you look at this roster right now, they are not going to get to the line in the series. Like they don't have guys that are getting to the free throw line consistently. It's Bam, and that's it. That's the only guy that you could possibly see getting to the line maybe more than 4 or 5 times in a game this series. So they have to, like you said, they have to shoot the ball at a higher level. And I think the big thing, other than us just saying, oh, they have to make shots, they have to take their first shot. Because I think Boston did a really good job of that in game one, where like Miami was like overthinking their initial looks, where like they probably could have had like a first shot. And
how many shot clock violations did they have in that game?
They're like dribbling into nothing into an extra kick out. Like I think that's going to be the main thing that Miami's coaching staff is kind of hammering is like, if you have an open look at any point in the shot clock, at any point of your half court offense, you have to take it. You cannot play into Boston's defensive strengths and kind of extend possessions, because that's what they want you to do, because then they can rotate around and use their length and switch and everything along those lines. So Miami's going to have to just get shots up kind of like they did in that fourth quarter run. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to get DeLon Wright 5 for 5 from 3 at any other point in the series, but you have to have opportunities there where you just take shots. You cannot put your back against the shot clock. You can't have turnover problems. Like if Miami has any chance to like win games in this series, you have to blow Boston out in the turnover battle. Like you have to absolutely turn them over. You have to get out on the break. And if you're losing that battle, you are putting yourself in a very hard position. So I think the last thing I'll say is Miami is a bad transition team. They've been all season. They're not very good in the fast break. But when you look at this roster right now and you look at their starting lineup and you look at all the young guys across the board, I think Miami's approaching this right now saying we have to just play fast against this team. We're not going to get to the line. We have a bunch of young guys that want to run. We just have to play fast, play into the fast break and see where it gets us and see if we can create runs out of that. And ideally you do it off of turnovers. So I think that's kind of where Miami's head's at offensively, because like I said, there's not a lot of open advantages against this team.
Yeah, and you mentioned all those margins. That rebounding category in particular, when you talk about just getting that first shot up and seeing what you can produce there, that's one area I expected them to perform better in. They finished with 5 offensive rebounds, which isn't close to enough, especially when the Celtics on the other end are emphasizing that and they pick up 10. They're just launching. The shot total was only 82-81 in the end in favor of Boston, but that 3-point advantage, 49-37, you got to find ways to bridge that gap, because it's not going to be free throws like you talked about. At least in game one, it wasn't 16-6. The offensive rebounding battle goes to Boston. The turnover battle relatively even. And I thought Boston played a little sloppy at times in this game. And they still end up playing even in the turnovers, with the Heat committing 9. I think, again, a lot of those shot clock and some other just over dribbling and bad ball management and just getting into the offense too slowly there. They got to get the shots up. I think you're exactly right about that, because that's how the Hawks have done it at times. It's just bombs away. I think even the Bulls, if they made it into the series, would have done the similar thing in just terms of letting their guys fire away and try to keep up with that 3-point battle. And listen, you got to find something here. It's not the best strategy to just fire away and take that first look. Not try to get deeper into it and find a really good look. I know the Heat want to do that a lot of times, but you're just up against a math battle here. Obviously, you're up against a personnel battle too, but you got to find a way to even this out sometimes. And honestly, if you want to push this series to 6 games and give yourself a game 6 in Miami and try to get lucky there, you got to try to get hot from three in a game or two and give yourself some life here. And they didn't give themselves that chance in game one.
Yeah, and I mean, it comes down to rotations a little bit too. I mean, I think from Miami's perspective, a lot of us were kind of talking about that Kevin Love needs to play more for Miami. I mean, he gives them a base
I
offense, at
agree.
least to get a good look off. Like, they made their run in that first quarter when Kevin Love came in. He played 5 minutes in the first half,
And
and
to your free throw point, he had 10 free throw attempts in the Chicago game.
made no sense. I still don't understand how that happened. But yeah, he gives them a spacing factor. He kind of pulls different guys away from the rim, and he can get them into their actions. He can get into the handoff stuff. He can get into his pick and pop stuff. Like, he at least gives them a different dynamic offensively. And like you said, they have to get threes up. They have to kind of get those shots up. And the other guy is Duncan. I mean, he's not very healthy, it feels right now. Like,
And
he battled
nobody
back.
is.
Yeah, nobody's healthy, but he's playing through it. And he was questionable in that last game of the regular season for Miami. Nobody really understood how, because we knew he wasn't going to play. He did not play. He did not play in the Philly game, even though he was available. He played in the Chicago game. He still looks like that back's bothering him. So it's hard to just say, okay, you need that guy just to put up a bunch of threes and get hot, because it's a hard expectation. You're not expecting that at this stage. That's why, as I said before, you're going to probably lean on Tyler in off-ball sets a little bit more. Just try and see if you can get him hot, hide in those corners, try to see if you can move the ball in that way. But it all starts, you're not just going to get open spot up looks. You have to generate paint touches. You have to generate rim attempts. And there's only a couple guys in the CBAC are really doing that right now. And it's Jaime Jaquez and it's Bam Adebayo. Like, those are the two guys that are going to have the ball in their hands a ton, possession after possession, and try to get things going north and south. So the offense thing is the tough part. That Miami's going to probably be sitting here right now making all their defensive adjustments, because offensively there's only so much they could do with what they have at right now. Like, there's only so much they can lean into. So they just got to play faster and just lean on the defense, I guess.
Yeah, at the same time, you got to keep up with Boston, especially if Boston has some cold stretches. You got to be able to take advantage offensively. And there were some moments in this game where the Celtics left the door open and the Heat just went ice cold for periods of time, even against some second units that Boston had out there. And theoretically, I think the Celtics have done a pretty good job holding up when teams try to go against Hauser. It slipped a little bit in this game, and there was a stretch there where you're wondering, like, is he going to be able to stay on the court here after missing a couple shots, after giving up a couple looks to, I think, Jaquez and maybe Love inside too. They kept those guys on the floor. Those guys survived. They got hot. And when the bench goes in Boston's direction too, beyond all the other stuff we're talking about here, you're really at a loss if you're Miami here. And, looking at some of the guys coming off their bench, you mentioned Love, right? I didn't know what to expect from him coming in this series, and he was really quiet early, and he just caught fire. I don't know if that's going to happen again. And then Robinson, which, maybe he gets healthier as the series goes on. They got 2 days off here, and then they have 2 days off before game 3 as well. So maybe that helps him to some degree, but he didn't really become a factor there either. Highsmith too. I looked, and going into the series, I think he shot 38% from three this year. I was surprised because I feel like every time the Celtics played them, he just can't make anything, which they need him to be able to do, because the Celtics are going to hedge away from guys too, as you mentioned that Miami likes to do. The Celtics have done it all year. They've done it going back to those 2022, 2023 teams with Robert Williams. So they're going to hedge away from guys like that and dare them to shoot too, and they got to be able to knock it down. He goes 0 for 4 in this game. So the bench, a big difference early in this series as well, which I was interested in, because this really was the first full playoff role Peyton Pritchard has played in. Sunday was effectively Sam Hauser's first full playoff game, playing a full rotation throughout a game. He really didn't play last year at all in that postseason run. And then, you have Horford being Horford out there for stretches of this game too. He had a double-figure scoring game. So the bench goes Boston's way too. It's over.
And I think the other player for Miami, I know he's not off the bench, but he's kind of their swing player, and somebody you're probably very familiar with is Caleb Martin. I mean, brutal game. I mean, he struggled at certain points this season, but I think that if you look at Miami's roster, like, they have shooters. You can call this guy a shooter. You can call this guy their defender. You can call this guy kind of different roles they're in. At this point, like, Caleb's your swing player. He's the guy that can give you randomly something different. He could randomly be an on-ball kind of tough shot maker. He could kind of randomly be a guy that could drive and get things at the rim and generate paint touches. Or he could randomly be a guy that's hitting a bunch of spot up looks. Or he could play like he did in game one. So like he's your swing player right now, it feels like. So like you kind of know what you're getting from a lot of these guys. They're going to lean defense with the Haywoods and DeLons of the world, as you mentioned. That's kind of a mainstay for the zone. They're just going to put those two guys up on the top of that zone and just let them work. But there has to be somebody that gets hot, and not like DeLon hot in the fourth quarter where he hits 5 threes.
That was
like
absurd.
You just have to have a little bit more consistency with your offense. It's like, okay, Boston, you have to make Boston say, okay, well, here's a guy we can't help off of right now. So now Miami finds a little bit of an advantage to say, okay, we can work off this and we can get to these actions. But it felt like from the very beginning, Miami never had that guy. Like they never had somebody that they could work off of at any point. It just felt like they were just trying things. And in a lot of ways, you kind of have to with the position they're in. They're in a unique spot right now with the guys that they're without, so they have to try things at the beginning of a series. And Spo's always a guy that likes to make adjustments from there. But like I keep saying, the offensive adjustments are limited. It just comes down to them maybe switching up lineups, maybe switching up minutes. I think Kevin Love and Bam playing together more is probably going to be something that they're going to lean on more and more as the series goes on. That's just what's inevitably going to happen. But like we're going to keep saying it over and over, but it's the shooting, because Boston's not going to stop shooting threes. It's not that they're going to shoot at the level that they did in game one. Maybe they will, but they're going to get them up. And you really can't compete with that if you're just playing this long game of, inconsistent offense in drives and different things like that. You have to get threes up. So we'll see who they lean on. I mean, they need Tyler. They need him consistently to get to certain shots on pull-ups.
Absolutely, especially against the style of defense that the Celtics are going to play there. And then you've got those guards that can go at him. It's tough against Holiday and White and those type of guys. White blocked him bad at one point at the rim there, which he's done all year. So it's tough because Boston defends too. They got that great offense, but their defense finished top 5 as well. So they do it on both ends. It's just a daunting matchup beyond all the injuries and stuff. So to go into this game, and yes, you go down 17-2 early. You go down 30 at one point. I did commend the Heat for keeping it slightly close midway through the first half. And then even into the fourth to give themselves a chance. If the Celtics kept the cold spell going, there was 5 minutes left and it was down to 14. So they stayed in the game as well as they could. And I'm grading on a scale here because the Celtics unbelievable personnel here and what the Heat are missing. And it's too bad because if Butler's in this series, if even Josh Richardson's in this series, who I think would be a great fit for what they need here against this team, and then Rozier, who is supposed to be the big deadline boost, maybe the series doesn't happen because the Heat are higher in the standings, so they win that first play-in game. So we certainly might not be sitting here even talking about this series if those guys are available. But it's brutal to watch a team coming into the series that is capable of competing, but just is missing so much here. Because even from the Celtics perspective, you're glad you get a free pass per se if that's what they end up getting here. But you want to be tested too to some degree because you might play a tough Cavs team round 2, or who knows who's going to be there in the East Finals. And the way it's looking right now, Brady, if there's no test in the East at all, you're going to get into the NBA Finals if you're the Celtics and play probably the most battle-tested team you can imagine, given what the West looks like. So you'll take the breaks. Every team gets them on the way to a championship, but this is tough. I hope the Heat find a way to at least make this slightly entertaining here.
I think Miami trusts Eric Spoelstra enough. I think that's the guy that they're ultimately going to lean on in this matchup. Then they'll say he can kind of make this competitive, make his adjustments, and do things from there. But look, I think you saw the way Miami battled back, and I think as much as we know the advantages that Boston has, Miami's going to make this a dogfight. They're going to make this some ugly, gritty games. It feels like down the stretch. But like we keep saying, once it gets to that point, can they close it out? Like, do they have that guy? And Terry Rozier is not changing everything here. But Terry Rozier can actually do things and get you into a different offense down the stretch in a close game. He can get you a shot off, whereas it's just a different mindset right now for Miami when you look at their roster, that you have to work for every bucket. At least if you had a tough shot maker, it can make things easier in that way. But, it really comes down to that and just making things as ugly as possible, as crazy as it sounds.
Want to take a quick minute here to give a shout to our sponsor, Prize Picks, prizepicks.com/CLNS. Give them a shout here real quick. It's playoff time, so you got all these great matchups. You got all these great players on display. Always love going in the app, just seeing what they think these guys are going to do any given night. Last game went more on Porzingis. He fell just short of that on his point total, but Derek White, my guy Joe Slay, went more on him. He had a big game after a slow start, so it's fun. Some close calls there, and any given night, you just pick two guys, as many as 6, build your daily fantasy sports team, and just predict whether they're going to go more or less on their stat projections. That's all there is to it. It's simple. It's fun. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS, and they'll give you a 100% deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/CLNS. You mentioned Martin a couple minutes ago, Brady. What do you make of the controversy over the foul there at the end?
Oh man, I mean, I think Drew Holiday pushed him, and it led into a momentum play. Like I know this is a rivalry. There's gonna be sides, and everybody's gonna take one, and one side's gonna be right, one side's gonna be dirty. But Caleb Martin's not a dirty player. He's just not that type of player. He's not. He's always been that type of guy. Um, and there was, I know things are very controversial on social media and everything talking about it, but I mean, Drew got him with a little uh, momentum push there, and it went into the body of Tatum. But this idea um, that Spo is setting things up to hurt opposing teams' players is, I don't even know what to say about that. Like, that is the farthest from the truth. But yeah, I think it was just kind of just an unnecessary um, play that led to Tatum falling. But I mean, the fact that he got right up, the fact that he was able to kind of bounce up from that, because I think everybody watching that was thinking might have hit his head on the floor. Even he might have even had contact there, but he got right up and he seemed like he was fine, and it seemed like there was no even mention of anything of it somewhat injury. So I mean, that was a positive, I guess, from Boss's perspective. But I mean, my take on it is I didn't think it was a dirty play.
Sorry, apologies, everybody. You got me, Brady?
Yes, sir. I hear you.
Yeah, just had to switch my audio there. I was the culprit. Sorry to the chat there of the buzzing noise.
I beat the allegations.
Yeah, so that was me. I think we solved it there. So let's continue the conversation. Yeah, I'm going to throw that to the side too. I don't know what happened. I looked at the replay. It did look like there was a little shove. Maybe there was a little something extra there. I talked to Caleb after, and it didn't seem like he even thought about that being like a little extra dirty thing there that he would have done. Like, he wasn't very defensive. He was pretty matter of fact. He talked about the momentum kind of throwing him in there, and then he tried to help him up. Like, if there was anything extra he was trying to show there, I don't think he goes and helps him up. So you saw that too. The scout thing's silly. The timeout was a coach's challenge,
Right.
and there was 90 seconds left. And I guess the one thing you could say is why the Celtics starter's still in the game at that point in a 20-point game with 1 minute left. So I don't know. That might be my takeaway, if anything, there. So I don't know. It'll be interesting though, because there has been some moments this year. Duncan and Jalen got into it in that Super Bowl Sunday game, and
Yep.
they got wrapped up, and Duncan wasn't happy with Jalen, and he got in his face. So that's the kind of stuff that's going to happen in this series. And Spo said in the opening press conference there, you can't be fearful going up against this kind of team here. So how do you try to bridge the gap between these two rosters here? Probably be a little extra physical, get in guys' faces, try to get under their skin. I know Bam leveled Derek White with a hard screen there a couple minutes before. So this stuff's going to happen. And Tatum even said that. He expects there to be some hard hits, fouls, and he just jumped right up and went and shot the free throw. So he expects it, and that's how the Celtics are going to have to approach this too, if anything does come up like this here at all in this series. But it'll be interesting to see if anything comes out of it and just how the Celtics feel about it. They kind of shrugged it off. Caleb gave his side of the story there, and we'll see what happens. It's a playoff series. Stuff's going to come up.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, it's playoff basketball. I mean, nobody expected it to be not physical, especially when we're talking about these two teams. I mean, the history that they have, The fact that they've had these moments in the past, the regular season or not, like this is Miami Heat, Boston Celtics basketball. This was not. Miami's not going to roll over either. It's as much as the expectation is that this is a one-sided affair. Like Eric Spoelstra is going to come in and have this team ready to at least compete and have the mentality that they can win this series, whether everybody thinks they're crazy or not. That's just the mindset that they're always going to have. So this is going to be physical both ways. It has to be. And maybe it needs to be after we just watched both teams just chuck up threes. And as we were talking about game plans, they're both just going to sit on the outside and shoot. Maybe it needs to be a little more physical and play that type of game. So we talked about Boston's defense and how much they've improved and the different things they could do. As I said before, Miami's going to lean into their defense even more. So as much as this series goes on and it leans more and more into defense for both teams, physicality is going to happen. It's going to get to that point, and it's a rivalry, as you said.
Yeah, what impresses you about Boston's defense? Because I don't feel like that side of the ball gets talked about enough for them. They were uneven last year on that side. They, of course, gave up 43% three-point shooting to the Heat in that East Finals last year. Lapses left and right. I thought they overhedged in that series away from Martin again and again and just gave up wide open threes to guys like
Mhm.
that on the Miami side. And I feel like their defensive inconsistency last year, even though they ranked well, was a big reason that their team was so erratic, especially into the playoffs. They finished 10th, I want to say, out of 16 playoff teams last year in defensive rating before they fell to Miami in 7 there. So this unit looks much better. Porzingis blocked a couple shots in this game. Tatum had a couple really nice steals, just fronting guys. He knocked Hawkins to the ground at one point, and just the ball bounced off him and out of bounds. So some good turnovers for us. That's not something the Celtics have done well all year, is force turnovers, but positionally they defend pretty well out there, and Porzingis has been a part of that. Of course, you had Drew Holiday to the dynamic, who was
Yeah.
recovering loose balls across the back line and just trying to throw them off Heat players and get the ball back there. So this was a strong defensive performance for the Celtics, alongside their 45% three-point shooting and the big offense output.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned them helping off Caleb in the past, and I leaning to it. But I mean, the reason they don't have to help off those guys anymore is because they have such strong point of attack defenders. I mean, you'd help off because your guard defender loses the ball handler, and then all of a sudden it's a 2-on-1, you pull over. They're not forcing. Miami's not forcing many 2-on-1s right now. It just seems like they're just getting to certain spots and and just containing really well. Like I said, the book is kind of out that the physicality defensively with Tyler is what you need to do as a defense. I mean, they were Boston was extremely physical with him and was able to kind of get him out of those comfortable pull-ups and things like that. And I mean, the other thing I thought Boston did well defensively was just they didn't send much doubles at Bam. I mean, they pretty much said, I know they talked about after the game, kind of living with certain shots and everything, but I mean, they're pretty much saying we're going to let Bam to take certain shots and let him work. And if he puts up a bunch of points, he does. But we're not pulling off of the outside. And it gets back to what we were saying and saying Miami needs to get these shots up from outside. Boston's kind of saying, well, we're not going to allow you to get a bunch of shots up outside. We're going to make you play the mid range game. We're going to make you, if Bam drops 35, he drops 35, but we're not going to pull off of you. And I mean, it's kind of a it's a good game plan for what Miami has right now with the guys that they have available. So and look, Boston has a bunch of switchability. They have a bunch of guys that um they could kind of switch off of many of the actions that Miami runs, because Miami runs a lot of these guard like kind of guard screens or guard actions. Um they could just switch all over the place and kind of let Porzingis kind of alter some shots around the rim and do things like that. And Miami kind of views it as, well, we're going to wait for Pritchard or Hauser or somebody like that come in and let Jaime mismatch hunt. Like, that's our best advantage. And that's why you saw Jaime get an advantage. I mean, he had 16 points. I don't think he had a three or a free throw. Like, it was all stuff inside the arc and just kind of working from there. It's what Miami did with Jimmy in the past. That was kind of Miami's offense in a lot of those games against Boston in the past, that they're going to kind of let him operate with his back to the basket and see if you could force an overreaction there. If maybe Boston starts to stunt a little bit, then maybe you start working your kicks and your swings, and maybe you get more threes. So, but to answer your question, I mean, Boston definitely gives you trouble, not healthy or healthy. Like, they just have a good, point of attack system that they work around.
What more can Bam do? I know there's so much on his shoulders already, and I thought he had a pretty good game, uh, hitting shots, even hit a corner three at one point. Um, is there anything else he can do beyond what he's already doing here?
I mean, he can't let up. I mean, he has to attack. He has to take those shots. As I talked about the single coverage, he can't
He has
overthink
to
it.
be so aggressive.
He has to be. I mean, he's the one guy that can force, as I just mentioned the word overreaction. He's the one guy that can potentially force an overreaction for Boston. That maybe they start to stunt a little bit more toward the middle of the floor and try to just turn him over in a way that maybe you can set up. Miami can set up some sprays for threes. It's like nobody else in this team is really going to force that. No team, nobody is really going to force a major adjustment from Boston um, to change up their game plan. So Bam has to do that. And like I said before, I said it earlier, look at this roster right now. There's not guys on this team that are going to average more than 4 free throw attempts a game in the series. They don't have that guy right now on the roster. Like Jimmy owns that for Miami. He's the guy that puts them in position in the free throw line. So it's Bam or nobody. It's like Bam or bust when you talk about putting your head down and getting calls. He has the ability to kind of use that pump fake and get into that bump, get into that foul on the jumper. He could put his head down, do stuff around the rim, maybe get to the line. But that's the important thing. Like if you could somewhat control the game in the paint with Bam and just try to control pace at some degree, because I mean, I think we could both agree. I don't think Miami's going to control pace for a good portion of the series. Just Boston just has the momentum. They have the firepower. They have the shooting. So
Although
Miami,
in the fourth quarter, and I know it's 31 at that point,
yeah,
Boston does slow down a little bit there, and that's when the Heat
teams make
rack
their
up some
run. Right.
possessions and get some shots off and stuff like that. So you really the only area where the Heat can catch them off guard is that fourth quarter late game, close
Mhm.
game. But you have to get there first, and then as we've talked about, what can the Heat pull out in those
Right.
situations? Because the Celtics have struggled in spots there, but it's not like they're abysmal in those situations. Like, they still have some stuff they can get to. I'm sure they've made some adjustments off their regular season struggles in those spots. So, I don't think it would surprise anybody if there was a close game in this series if the Celtics pull it out, especially when there is no Butler, no Rozier on the other side. And man, yeah, Rozier, you at least would have liked to have seen him here. And it doesn't seem like he's going to play at this point, at least the way they're talking about it.
You don't get the feeling. I mean, they're making it, to day to day, week to week kind of thing. That maybe if Miami extends the series a game or two, you could maybe get to that point. But it does not seem likely. It does not seem likely whatsoever that they're going to rush him back. Um, and he does. It does make a difference for their late game offense, as we keep talking about. That's why I keep saying, like, if if you were to tell Heat fans that like the Heat should play faster, they would call you crazy. Because if you've seen this team play in transition, it's just not it's not pretty basketball. But it does seem like what you look at right now, like late in the game, your best bet is to like, okay, lock in defensively, play that type of range. Maybe you could turn Boston over and just try to find any advantage you can. Because look, as we're crediting Boston's defense, as soon as you slow it down in the clutch and force it into a half court possession, you're handicapping yourself. Like you're putting yourself in a much worse position to try and get a good look. So that's the tough part. It's like we're talking about Miami trying to force their way out and get a win. There's like benchmarks here. Like you have to get to that point. You have to make it a competitive game. You have to shoot well. And then when you get to a tie game with 3 minutes left, you have to be on point. Because as soon as if you make a mistake in that position, Boston can really capitalize. And that's the part that's gonna hurt. So unless you get like an on fire Tyler Hero game where he's just kind of unconscious and is really in a good flow, and that's why I think the starter games for him are important. Like if he can get going at the start of a game mentally for him, like that'll help for his late game offense. But like what Boston did in game one, for example, it's hard for him to get a flow throughout the game and try to find his range when they already kind of took him out of things. Um, and then it just comes down to Bam tough shot making down the stretch.
It's gonna be interesting. I think Spo will try everything over the course of 4 games here, and maybe the best bet's 5. It probably is. I'm in my PTSD state giving 6. I just give the benefit of the doubt to them to find a way, figure something out, have a couple hot shooting nights, just extend the series longer than we think it's gonna be here, and maybe that's just me trying to be safe here with how I pick it. A lot of people are looking at this right now and saying sweep, which I understand. I wanna hit you with one more Celtics question and, look at their big picture here if they are gonna just breeze through this series. But first, I want to shout out our other sponsor here, PXG. PXG, great golf apparel for the spring right now, the summer. If you're in Miami, it's all year. You'll be wanting this stuff. It's great leisure wear as well. Awesome styles. I can pull up some pictures here for the people too, I believe. think I got it in here somewhere, but it's just awesome. Polos, hats, all the different things you need for the course. You gotta look good to play good, and they're gonna help you with that. And you'll get 10% off all their apparel right now at pxg.com/garden. Head over there now, pxg.com/garden. Check out what they got. It's almost that time of year up here, Brady. It's still a little cold. So I'm really looking forward to getting down to Miami this weekend and trying out a course down there, maybe in my PXG. So check it out, pxg.com/garden. Save 10% off all our apparel. And I really am. I was hoping for this one, Brady, in part because I think it's always more interesting when these teams play. Like Chicago would have been so boring.
Oh
At
yeah.
least here you have the hope that the Heat can figure something out and tap into some of the old difficulties they've given Boston here. But it's a new Boston team. You look at it, it's completely different than a year ago. I know that's been their motto all year. But when you see Jason Tatum come out in a playoff game and have 10 assists, which was unthinkable a couple of years ago, and he made it look easy. He made all the reads. He looked against different defenses and found where the ball needed to go. And he didn't shoot great. He didn't let that impact him. He still defended. And I know he used a +3 in this game, which was weird to me. I know the plus minus is always funky. He probably played in some second units or something that didn't fare well. But he was excellent in this game. A lot of praise for him after this one. Porzingis said it was a beautiful game. You talked about some of the reads and pass sets he set up. So this is a guy you could take advantage of if you're Miami as a playmaker. Blitz, force into some mistakes. I think the biggest thing is that him and Jalen would attack this defense head on in the past, try to solve it by scoring the ball. But you saw both of them at different points in this game become passers and impact the game in that way, and he was incredibly effective.
Yeah, I think if we were to make bets for what's to come now as the adjustment or what we're going to see in game two, I would expect a big scoring game for Tatum, just because I think that's Miami's going to make that adjustment. They're going to pull away those skip passes. They're going to pull away those swings. Um, and it sounds crazy, but they're going to allow more single coverage against Tatum. Like they're when they're in that zone, because as much as we say, even Heat people talked about them pulling away from the zone. You can't play zone against this team, so they're going to go away from it. It's become their base, like one of their base defenses. They're not just going to go away from it fully. They're still going to lean on it. But there's certain principles within the zone that they could stay away from, which is one of the things is that the top guy helping down on Tatum or whoever's in that mid post area. I think they're going to allow more single coverage. And the issue was, I mean, Tatum did a really good job and Boston did a good job of finding the box where they found the advantage. Like they were hunting Duncan's side of the zone. Like they were trying to get Duncan on Tatum's back and force that double. But I mean, the way the zone is set up, you have backline defense, you have things behind you that you don't really need to overreact from the top, it felt like. And I think that's where Miami's going to feel this out. So 100%, as I said before, Tatum, great game one. I thought with the passing, with the skip passes to the weak side corner, I thought that set everything up. I thought he made incredible reads with the way Miami's defense reacted to him. But I think we're at the point now where moving on in the series, you're probably going to see a lot more Tatum drives, Tatum mid-range jumpers. They're going to allow it. I don't think they're just going to allow Boston to get a bunch of open threes constantly off swings and everything. So we'll see the adjustments they make. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they treat Tatum and Brown because they still have so much respect for those guys as scorers. And you don't want to just allow those guys to fully get going. But I think at this point you have to pick something with this team, right? I mean, we're talking about the fact that you can't pull off of a player anymore. Like they have a lot of good shooters, but like you can't just limit everything. You have to pick something. And you have to play a numbers game at some point. So I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to pick something, and I think you're going to see just a little more single coverage with guys like Brown and Tatum.
It's risky because he can score 40, 50 against that single
100%.
coverage, but you gotta try everything at this point, and they're going to. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Game 2 is Wednesday night, so there will be another practice here, I'd assume, on Tuesday for these teams, and then into it with a nice early start, 7 o'clock Wednesday, which I like as well. Appreciate Brady Hawk being here. Plenty of time to talk about both these teams' big pictures. If this series goes the way it looks like it might here. And so maybe we'll circle back on that later in the series. But for now, Celtics dominate game 1. Heat show some spurts of competitiveness. We'll see if that translates into an actual win or two in this series. And then we'll keep an eye on the health too. It does seem like Butler's going to miss this whole series now at this point,
Yeah.
right? At least according
Yeah.
to the
100%.
reporting. Just a bummer. This could have been an interesting one, a fun one that really means something for the Celtics here, but Miami just demoralized right now. I appreciate Brady coming to break it all down. You can find him on Twitter at Brady Hawk 305 and his work at 5 Reasons Sports. Looking forward to seeing you down there in Miami in a couple days, Brady.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.